Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for joining us for another stream of Created in the Image of God. Tonight's host, Wade Fransson, I'll go ahead and give his introduction, and then he'll take it off from here. Wade's life journey has taken him all over the world and provided him with compelling philosophical and spiritual insights. After a troubled childhood involving divorce, domestic kidnapping, and an international custody battle, Wade joined and later became a minister in the Worldwide Church of God. He shared this in his stirring autobiographical story across the volumes, The People of the Sign and The Hardness of the Heart. Hard-fought answers to thorny biblical questions prompted the mind-expanding and satisfying conclusion to his trilogy, In the Rod of Iron. After leaving the ministry, Wade earned an MBA, held significant roles in noteworthy companies, and founded Something or Other Publishing, through which Wade continues to pursue his deep interest in how biblical principles and prophecy can shed light on society's challenges. Wade currently lives in Brooklyn, Wisconsin with his wife and their 2 children. If you haven't done so already, we'd also recommend liking and subscribing this video. That certainly helps with our channel and helps you get notifications about upcoming streams. We're here every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, and we look forward to seeing you every single week. With that being said, Wade, over to you.
Thank you so much, Alex, and good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you today. It's been another busy week, and had anticipated that our regular guest for this new incarnation of the program, Daniel Sanderson, would be with us tonight. Not sure what exactly has happened. He may yet join us. We had an interesting conversation teed up, and I'll continue with that same conversation. I'm going to introduce you to somebody on video who a dear friend of mine has been encouraging me to listen to for probably going on 2 years. And I may or may not have listened to a brief segment from this gentleman, but he urged me, in light of recent discussions in preparation for this week's broadcast, to check out a specific video, and I did. And so I'm going to share 3 or 4 minutes of that later in the show, maybe a little bit more than that, we'll see. I haven't actually had time to walk or to listen to the whole thing because it's been very busy. We're in the height of summer. We've got some repairs being done to our home. We had an electrician show up late, and got into some really fascinating conversations with him as well. All because of new insights that I'm gaining from the rich and fertile soil of the first few chapters of the Bible. Now, these are chapters that I've been studying my whole life, but every time I dig into them again, I find new insights. And being required to meet with you every Tuesday and to, do this show is requiring me to reflect, on these essential core messages from the very beginning of time, humanly speaking, or even the material universe, because the first few verses, the opening verses of the Bible, claim to speak about the creation of the universe and the establishment of our species on this planet, and about the nature of the relationships that would ultimately form the fabric of what we know of as civilization. So there is so much richness to be mined from those opening verses and opening chapters. And I approach this, as has been shared frequently, from the lens of logic, science, discernment, and a bias, which I openly acknowledge, which is the belief that these verses do come from God. I put that bias out there because I'm very willing and open to be challenged on anything that I present, whether you come at it from science, from logic, from philosophy. And that's why I've really enjoyed the conversations with Daniel Sanderson, who may yet join us again tonight. The video that was shared by me from this gentleman, whose name I'll reveal in a moment, gets at this same concept from a slightly different angle. An angle that I've been talking about and approaching the subject from, but this gentleman does so with a clarity and a diligence and a scholarship that I could only aspire to, right? He's well known and he's spent, decades researching these topics. He's got a lot of insight. And so it's going to be really fascinating to watch this video. But he gets at it from the very foundation of reality as we understand and as we experience it as human beings, right? Our intellectual life and our intellectual capacity, which I believe is God given, right? When God in the opening verses of the Bible in Genesis says that we were created in the image of God, which is the title of this broadcast, male and female created he them. That means we have, in a tiny, infinitesimally small germ seed kind of way. Imagine, the sperm, right? That imparts life into the cell at fertilization. In that tiny little way, the size of a pinhead, we have some of the capacities that God has. In that, he says, we were created in his image. And we have the ability to develop and cultivate some of the virtues that are viewed as godly, such as what Paul talks about in Romans, the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace. We don't know to what degree an animal, right? We've got a couple of cats in our household. We don't know to what degree they can experience love and joy and peace. Our particular cats, Licorice and Coconut, are domesticated, and they're wonderful. And sometimes as we care for them, as we nurture them, as we include them in our family life, one almost gets the feeling that maybe somehow at some level they are learning that they are developing. But their capacity is greatly less than the capacity of human beings, right? We have these abilities that, whether you believe they come through evolutionary mechanisms or whether they were granted at creation by a divine being, they exceed by orders of magnitude the capacity of anything else living on earth. And that intellectual life, that spiritual life, that emotional life is what this presenter is getting at. How is it that we can function? What are the operating systems of our intelligence? To use a different example, your computer, I'm right now on a PC, but we have Macs in our family, we have iPads, we have iPhones. They all have an operating system that allows them to be smartphones. And this operating system provides the ability for programs to run in various languages. And those computer code languages provide the basis of the functionality of these devices to perform these feats, which in any past civilization would be considered magic, right? You may be familiar with the quote. I think it might have been Steve Jobs, or I don't remember who rendered this quote, that any sufficiently advanced technology, and Alex, if you're in the background there, you may wish to share this quote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? These devices would have been considered magic in any past civilization because of the power that they have, because of the languages that they can comprehend, and the operating systems that allow them to run applications and services and whatnot. What am I getting at? This gentleman and his talk is going to be about the foundation of our functioning as human beings. From where does our consciousness not emerge, but on the basis of what is it empowered to think and to compute and to form ideas and to shape reality? Again, it all goes back, in my view, to the fact that we're created in the image of God. Now, the gentleman whose video I'm about to share with you was introduced to me by, as I mentioned, my friend. I'm not going to mention his name. I actually wanted him on the show tonight, but he's just a little bit under the weather, so he was not able to make it. We'll hopefully have him in a future show. But he is a documentary filmmaker, and he travels around the country doing the shooting, the video. And he's He's been involved in some projects that have gotten, relatively major distribution. So he has had a lot of experiences viewing and looking at life and looking at people and the various situations that arise in our modern society from the perspective of a documentary filmmaker. And I would have loved to have his thoughts on here tonight, but instead you just have me. The man that he introduced me to and has urged me to watch repeatedly over the last several years is a man named Jordan Peterson. Now, some of you may know Jordan Peterson much better than I do. He is I don't, I would have hoped my friend might have introduced him because I haven't had the chance to prepare a bio on him. And Alex, maybe you can share a link in the chat of a Jordan Peterson bio. But Jordan Peterson is coming at things from a religious, from a spiritual, from a perspective that is in some ways similar to my perspective. I don't wish to put words in his mouth or ideologies in his head, in his mouth. But I'm gonna now quickly show you where you can read about Jordan Peterson from the Daily Wire. But the video that I'm going to share with you was his appearance. I don't even have the date, but we'll share all this out with you later. Again, it's been a little bit busy, a little bit chaotic this week. But his appearance on the Joe Rogan show. And Joe Rogan is a very interesting individual because he's incredibly popular and watched by millions of people. He's not afraid to tackle difficult topics from a variety of perspectives, and he's even gotten in a little hot water about some of the guests that he has had on his show. He's a major popular icon that is conducting a dialogue across the nation. I can only hope to aspire to begin to create some of the discussions and some of the dialogues that Joe Rogan has been able to create. But to the degree that I do have an audience, these are some of the topics that I want to share. So without further ado, I am going to now share the segment from, thank you, Alex, from the January 25th, 2022 Jordan Peterson segment on Joe Rogan. And we're going to cut in at 4 minutes. So this particular video is actually not by Joe Rogan. It's another person, and I'm sorry for not having all the details, who is commenting on it. And I'm using his video to play the Jordan Peterson segment. And we may listen a little bit to the person presenting as well. We'll see. But here we go. This is Jordan Peterson getting back to the origins of how our minds work, how we process information, how we arrive at conclusions and ideas, and tying this in to the revealed Word of God. Give it a listen.
The more ideas are dependent on a given idea, the more fundamental that idea is. That's a definition of fundamental. So now imagine you have an aggregation of texts in a civilization. You say, which are the fundamental texts? And the answer is the texts upon which most other texts depend. And so you'd put Shakespeare way in there in English because so many texts are dependent on Shakespeare's literary revelations.
I'm going to pause right there to just mention one of the points that Jordan Peterson raised earlier in the broadcast, I believe. I hope I'm not duplicating something he's about to say, but from my recollection, he covered this already, that the Bible is literally the first book ever produced. Remember the Gutenberg press? And the first book that rolled off of it was the Holy Bible. So the collection of books, which is a mini library of its own, the 66 books of the Bible, was the first library ever published and literally the first book ever published. I mean, we had papyrus scrolls, we had different kinds, but the first published book that was produced for general use and general access literally was the Bible. And that's some of what he's getting at here.
And Milton would be in that category, and Dante would be in that category, at least in translation. Fundamental authors, part of the Western canon, not because of the arbitrary dictates of power, but because those texts influenced more other texts.
I'm going to pause it right there and welcome Daniel Sanderson. Daniel, I'm so glad you could join us. Your timing is actually, for being late, your timing is great. So And that's not a criticism. I am sure we probably failed to get you a link or something. Anyway, let me just jump back into what I'm doing here. I'm presenting a segment of Jordan Peterson, whom you may know more about than I do. I have a friend who's been urging me to watch Jordan Peterson for years, and I haven't really until he sent me this link, and I watched it this week. My friend is a documentary filmmaker who I had wanted on the show, but he's under the weather. We're going to run about 4 minutes of this. I'm going to go back just slightly, but I'm going to share with you that Jordan Peterson is here getting at the foundation of human thought, the programming, the operating system that we use to give our consciousness expression. Now, this is my words, my overlay. He has previously on this segment, which was originally done with Joe Rogan, talked about how the Bible is literally the first book ever published. Remember the Gutenberg press? That mini library of 66 books that is called the Bible was quite literally the first book. I had never really thought about that, but it is. First book rolling off for mass consumption, and it forms the basis of so much of society. I'm going to, again, scroll back here to about 4:01 and just let it roll. Hopefully I've brought you up to speed so that you're not in shell shock for what we're going to be talking about. And when he's done, we'll just talk about it, and I'd love your thoughts on it.
Okay. The more ideas are dependent on a given idea, the more fundamental that idea is. That's a definition of fundamental. So now imagine you have an aggregation of texts in a civilization. You say, which are the fundamental texts? And the answer is the texts upon which most other texts depend. And so you'd put Shakespeare way in there in English because so many texts are dependent on Shakespeare's literary revelations. And Milton would be in that category, and Dante would be in that category, at least in translation. Fundamental authors, part of the Western canon, not because of the arbitrary dictates of power, but because those texts influenced more other texts. And then you think about that as a hierarchy, okay, with the Bible at its base, which is certainly the case. Now imagine that's the entire corpus of linguistic production, all things considered. Now, how do you understand that? Like, literally, how do you understand that? The answer is you sample it by reading and listening to stories and listening to people talk. You sample that whole domain. You build a low-resolution representation of that inside you, and then you listen and see through that.
You're muted, though.
Thank you. Let me just pause there and let's reflect and maybe talk, because that is a pregnant set of sentences or paragraphs. Daniel, sorry to put you on the spot, but I've only listened to this once before. It immediately resonated with me. I immediately got what he's saying, and he expresses more clearly things that I've been trying to express over the last 5 to 10 years. So I assume you've thought about these kinds of concepts. You may even have sampled Jordan Peterson in your framework of reference as you build your, perspective and your lenses through which you view the world. But what would you say to these statements by Jordan Peterson?
He's accurate, but he's not fundamental enough. Period. I want to be really clear on that.
Thank you.
And I think it's a trap. To realize or to his bias is very revealing that the Bible is the fundamental foundation. I hosted
that is my bias as well, and I openly admit to it. That's why we have you on this show to enlighten us and provide a counterpoint to that bias.
The counterpoint, the only counterpoint that I can give to that is that it came from Greece. Period. Came from Greece. And
in what way did the Bible come from Greece?
Well, and I'm curious about how you're asking that question, right? Like if you fundamentally believe that
first I'm asking the question, is that what you're saying? Because he says the Bible is the foundation, and you're saying that came from Greece. Are you saying the Bible came from Greece, or his framework came from Greece, or what exactly are you saying?
Yeah, the biblical origins came from Greece.
And yeah, that does not resonate with me, but we can talk about it.
So, and I'm fuzzy on this, right? I don't. It's not that I don't understand it. I hosted a series called The Jesus Myth with a mythicist. Okay, it's on my YouTube channel, on the Planksip YouTube channel, and there's one particular fellow who's a biblical scholar who basically showed that the origins of the Bible came from ancient Greece. And I apologize because I just kind
Yeah.
of came into it, so I don't have the details of it.
And I
He's the
apologize for putting you on the spot. So let's do this. Let's put a pin in that. You and I
Yeah.
can have a talk and bring it up next time. So
Okay.
and we'll just put a question mark there. You know, to what degree is the Bible a result of Greek thought? So I could, for example, throw in some inputs, right? And but to me, there's a blurring here, which is that I would submit that Christianity is absolutely filtered through Greek thought, and even ideas like the Trinity and certain other, you know, Christian traditions like Easter are filtered through Greek thought.
Yeah.
You follow me?
Yeah.
Whereas the Bible would claim that Easter comes from Passover, which is Egyptian in origin.
Oh, I didn't
right?
know that.
The story of Passover is that the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt, and if you should, you know, maybe to get that low res image of it, watch the movie, the epic movie by Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments, right? And the death angel that came and Moses' fight with Pharaoh, that all goes back to Egypt, which certainly predates Greece, right? You would agree.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. Egypt does predate Greece. Yeah.
Right. So the Passover, and I will call it mythology. No, I won't call it the Passover. What's the right word here? It's the epic story of Passover. I'm not gonna use the word mythology. The epic story of Passover clearly predates Greece, but the Christian translation of Passover into Easter would be said to have arisen in Greece. And there's a thread of Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity, that would call that a pagan corruption of the biblical story. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm just by illustration show you sort of the history and the etymology here. And this will be a fascinating topic for a future show. I'm not seeking to be definitive here. I think this will be a fascinating exploration.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I will have to say that I admire Jordan Peterson. I think if I could describe him with one word, he's courageous. He's a courageous thinker. My abrasion with him is that he preaches a Christian apologetic of sorts that is compatible with our with modernity, that I think is less than sufficient, and it's honest. I think he believes it, but I think we're missing something if we don't give the origin story of ancient Greece its due attention and credit.
Thank you. This is a divine blessing, or the goddess Fortuna is smiling upon us in that I have you here and that we're discussing this. I could not be more happy. This is exactly the kind of question, the kind of intersection of ideas, thoughts, and biases that I am interested in on this show. which is called Created in the Image of God, which is my bias, the role of religion in society. So, how do we unpack these things? But can you and I agree for the moment that what Jordan Peterson is discussing is essentially correct, that we have a framework of reference built upon the ideas that we have consumed, that we create these low resolution images of the great works of human civilization? Let's leave aside for a moment whether the Bible is the foundation or not, because that's my point. I'm not trying to make it be your point, right? You follow me?
Yeah.
And but I do want the audience to understand that whatever they believe is derived from that process. And the most, I would go back to my college years, and when I took a class on psychology with Dr. David Albert, and it was revelatory because he began to show me what the various psychologists in the modern world taught, from Piaget to B.F. Skinner, and there are various ideologies, behavioralism, this and that. And he explained that what you grew up believing was shaped and influenced by these men. And it was revelatory to comprehend that the ideas that I had just assimilated through osmosis with no clue where they were coming from were derived from the books of these men. And I had accepted them uncritically as a child. And they had formed and shaped my perspectives and my awareness without me being aware of it and without critically examining them at all.
I could add something there, I think.
Yeah.
I think this is part of, if I'm going to offer a defense of biblical thought and tradition, and in particular, I think I'm leaning towards more of a Judaic wisdom, where we'll use behaviorism as an example. So if the modern understanding of thought is based off of a behaviorist, or the works of B.F. Skinner, for example, right? And that's what we think for the current modernity. The issue is that science is so improves upon itself, right, and it revises itself. That
it definitely has that capacity, and one can assume that it does. And I'm not disagreeing that it does, but I'm just saying it's trial and error, it's experimentation, yeah.
Well, no, the point that I was trying to make is that there's not a bad side, or there's a negative side to that the lifespan of a scientific understanding has doesn't have an expiration date per se. Right.
Agreed.
But it does invalidate itself. So for example, to make the point, which I'm trying to actually give a compliment to the tradition of Judaic thought in this instance, because in my opinion, it's the longest living text-centric living language, which kind of exists onto its own self, right? It's I guess it forms the basis of the Christian faith, but the Judaic faith is something that, and this is where the traditionalists or the orthodoxy comes in and says, you know what? If you give long enough time cycles, we'll return to some of the truths that will reappear, right?
Yes.
And so, let's say, for example, that we can talk about the psychology or the way a society should be organized, and we are living in a prosperous time. Okay, so what happens when we're not living in a prosperous time, and the very nature of the human spirit is actually challenged? Where do we draw that wisdom from? Do we draw it from ancient texts? Quite possibly. Right? Because of the fact that we don't have that lifespan of I guess, like long withstanding traditions that we can rely upon to help us pull us through, those times. I'm not fully defending that. I'm saying I see some of the sympathy in holding on to that lineage of information and wisdom, if that
Yep.
makes sense.
Yeah, there comes a time when we have to go examine the bathwater we threw out to discover whether or not there was a baby in there.
Yeah, poor baby keeps getting thrown around.
Right. And allow me to make a comment here, and that is that you probably smile within yourself thinking, Wade, I'm trying to make a point that's supportive of your perspective. But I want to
Yeah, I was trying to. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I want to clarify what my perspective really is. I do
Okay.
not believe that the word of God needs defending, or it stands on its own. It proves, and each individual must prove it for him or herself. And I have very little role to play. So, but I am very concerned about the corruption of understanding that arises. This is a tangent of this topic, but it's related because we create that low resolution image that he was saying of whatever text, and it's a popularized, oversimplified soundbite version. It's a caricature. It's a caricature. It's not the real thing. And religion is notoriously unscientific. Religion becomes enshrined dogma, and it does not refresh itself, typically. We can look back through history and see how religion becomes calcified in whatever low-res understanding of the impulse that drove the creation of that religion. So if we go back to Göbekli Tepe and this discussion we've had off and on, which we'll dive into in depth someday, about whether human society and civilization arose from a religious impulse, or whether religion arose from human experience and thought and creative activities, chicken or the egg on that. It's my view that, as some say about Göbekli Tepe, the oldest installation that we've discovered and uncovered and unearthed and studied, is that it's proof that religion drove the creation of that initial thriving thrust of civilization. There was a religious impulse behind it. However, that religious impulse, wherever it comes from, and I believe it comes from a divine being outside of time and space, when it enters time and space and it hits the ground and it hits the dirt, we human beings who are at the pinnacle of emerging consciousness on this planet, we instantly begin to interpret it, to build something based on our understanding of it, and then we enshrine that structure that we've built with dogma to protect it and preserve it. But all we're doing is sealing its doom because, as you said, it comes with an expiration date because we didn't understand it properly. We understood it maybe even the best we could at the time with the language and the thoughts and the concepts of the time. And that's what's interesting to me about Jordan Peterson, because he's talking about this low resolution image that we have based on whatever it is that we're reading, whatever it is that we're consuming, whatever it is that we're buying into. To put it another way, something that I've been thinking a lot about this week, because it occurred to me that there are powerful people on this planet who influence, whose goal it is to influence and shape human thought and human perception, right? The media and those who drive certain narratives in the media are interested in getting us to accept and believe certain things, to determine what we stand for. And there's this saying that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for everything, right? It's a colloquial soundbite. My point is this. There are those who want to help us determine what we stand for. It might be Black Lives Matter. It might be prayer in schools. It might be, respecting people's pronouns. It might be overturning Roe v. Wade. I'm trying to use examples from both sides of the spectrum here. There are those who seek to shape our thought and stand for something. And oftentimes what's happening is they want us to stand for something. But in the meantime, we're falling for a lot of stupid ideas because of what we have been taught to claim to stand for. And so getting people to understand that this is going on and not blaming anybody, not taking sides on anything, but just getting people to analyze, where are these ideas coming from? And what is the impact of me just buying whatever it is that they are selling, whoever they are, right? That's what's interesting to me on the surface of Jordan Peterson, whether or not it's Greek thought or the Bible that is the foundation. We'll save that for another day. Sorry for the long-winded monologue, but I want you to understand, Daniel, where I'm coming from on this.
Okay.
Make sense? Any comments on my long-winded dialogue?
I'm left almost speechless because I don't, there's a point where I don't know what to say anymore, and it's I think there's a reservation on from my standpoint of like, I have a choice, right? I could well, let's describe this carefully. I could move into a more spiritual and committed religious experience, right? I mean, I could make that choice, and for some reason, and I have to say to myself, well, what is that reason? What is the reason that's holding me back? And I think it's less than truthful. I think it's less than honest, in my opinion. And so either that's a perversion or something that's deeply flawed within my character, but there's something so core to the essence of my being that says that's not truthful unless you're truthful with the way you explain it. So to say things like there's an omnipotent outside force, a being that we imagine as a father figure, I think is being less than truthful. I think that if we could use words like, if we pretend, if we understand that this actually comes from family and kin-based bias, and it's a great working operating system to pretend, I'm okay with that. Even I find more truth and value in that if people were just honest.
Well, I believe that's an accurate description. That is what religion generally is. Generally, throughout human history, people have adhered to the religion they were taught by their parents. You know, there's that Jesuit saying, give us a child until he's X number of years and we'll have him for life. I'm mangling the quote, but I know it's a real quote.
Okay, so then...
And on the flip side, I'll quote an eminent source of wisdom whom I greatly respect, Bono, who said, I'd join the movement if there was one I could believe in. You know, maybe that's more where you're coming from. I don't know.
No, I think then that brings it into the nature of belief. But I guess I do have a belief system, Wade. I mean, everything that I've studied and researched, there's a reason why I gravitate towards ancient Greece, and it's that hierarchy of good. It's got an impregnated ethical system that I see that we are orientated towards goodness. I think I'm a good person. You think you're a good person. It's a self-evident bias through all of humanity.
Everyone thinks they're right.
Everybody
on
thinks,
top of it.
well,
Yeah.
that they're more or less right. And so
Yeah.
you realize if you
Right.
hold up the mirror or you look into the reflection into the pool, you're going to see that a lot of this is really, just like you're saying, created in the image of God. It is a reflection of what we are truthfully.
And I'm totally fine with you saying good, created in the image of good or God. Yep.
Right, and you're fine with that.
Yeah.
But what happens is that if I make that one little blip over and I say God,
Right.
and some people take that in a different context. If they're using it as a heuristic, if they're thinking that, I don't know how to really explain this, but they take these things and you realize that it's like they're watching a Disney movie. They're taking them as literal truths when they're not literal truths. And the people who, like yourself, or the people who are like the fathers of the church communities, right? The leaders, the thought leaders, are fine to let them believe in these, mythical sort of like heuristics as something that is real, because they realize that there's an asterisk beside real, and it feels less than honest, Wade. That's what I want to call it out on, is say it's less than honest.
And if I'm in any way ever being less than honest, I want to know about it, right? It's my belief that truthfulness is the foundation of all virtues. It's one of the things I believe in. And so I also believe that the most difficult thing for God, to tell you about the most difficult thing for God to reveal to you is the truth about yourself, right? And that's the whole construct of what I call creation, is to allow that reflection to happen on a physical material plane that is less than the eternal spiritual plane or dimension, right? So that this whole construct of material, which is basically energy, right? Particles aggregating into atoms and molecules, such that, these hands are somehow just a mysterious collection of energy particles that coordinate their activities such that hands present themselves, right? That all of that construct exists to help the spirit component bring itself into accountability about what is true and what is false, what is honest, so that it can progress from the state of where it's at, so that there is a progression towards greater good, greater perfection. And whatever flaws exist in it can be hammered out on this material plane.
It's got like a self-sorting function built within it.
Yeah. And again, evolution, right? And those mechanisms that, allow one species to survive and thrive and another to fail and be relegated to the dustbin of history. And we literally consume, it's horrible, right? It's horrible in one level. We literally consume the dead bodies of everything that has failed in order to allow ourselves to continue to grow, right? The tree derives its nutrients from the minerals, which is a lower level of existence. The animal eats the plants, and the humans have also existed on animals. Though if you go back to the first chapters of the Bible, the intent was that we were to be vegetarians. I think that's clear from the texts. Even way back when, God gave every green herb to man as his food. And then later, the consumption of animals was introduced, again, as part of the whole fall of mankind. But you really have to dive into these texts and take them seriously to understand this. The minute you just start tossing them out as myth, and that's the conundrum, right? I tend to be a literalist because I believe that in some sense, these things literally happened. Does that mean I believe every aspect of the story of Genesis is correct and true? No, it's a condensation into a story of things that really happened as humankind emerged from whatever it was emerging from, right? And science continues to explore and develop theories as to exactly how our species arose. The story of Genesis is a beautiful, powerful, poetic expression of how that origin came about. And, I've shared here one view is that, the woman, I shared this last time, the woman is actually representative of the soul of man, that which causes him to aspire to a future state of being. And not only that, gives him the possibility to realize it by bringing forth another human being who could aspire to become something better than he was. Right? Unfortunately, we know the tragedy of Cain and Abel, where that didn't really happen immediately. But all of this is, and I'm sorry, I'm just going on and on here, and it looks like you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, okay. So here's the point where a free thinker or somebody experiencing the wisdom of the text might put their hand up and say, okay, great wisdom there, great for inspiration, great for writing in the margins, right? Which is a practice that I would say that if you had people in your church, you would say you have your personal Bible, write in it, interact with it, have a
Right.
relationship with the text, right?
Yep.
I find that beautiful and very fascinating, to be quite honest. That the woman represents the soul. Okay, and if the idea that the woman represents the soul, what if I put a flavor or a spin on that, Wade, and I said, biologically speaking, men, because it's you and I are men, right? We drive towards women, right? And the male species is driven towards the female for
Yep.
reasons that we've experienced, right? Okay, and
Absolutely.
mostly every male
It's
has experienced.
hardwired biology.
Exactly. Now there's a whole cascading of biological, I guess, reality that emerges from that. Okay, the pair bonding, the all of those descriptions that you would observe from a biological lens are, if you look at it entirely through a dogma, you don't really get to see the beauty of what biology has revealed. And
Right.
so this is
Amen.
my apologetic is to say you have to be able to run two parallel programs to understand the beauty of science, right?
Namaste.
And also not throw away the foundational texts. But
So
then
how
you
does
can
that?
appreciate and love the text more.
Thank you.
But you don't have to throw out biology. You can actually look at it from a standpoint that all of the fundamental religious texts actually come to life more if you look at them with a biological substrate.
If you respect them, right? You can't use science and biology to discredit and toss them out, because then that dance never happens.
Okay, there we go. That was a wonderful. I salute you, Wade. That was very beautiful thing to say, and that's the consilience that I hope takes shape. And you will be speaking God's language, a pure form of goodness, if you can make that merger happen. If humanity can come together in that direction, then my job here is done.
So
No, I mean,
here,
not my job,
right.
our job. I have no,
Thank you.
that is a faith without having to make the choice. That just is emerging from me. That's truth
Yes.
reincarnated and born again. However you want to
Did we
reemphasize
talk
that.
about Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, the one philosophy book that I ever read and the one philosophy book that you ever didn't read? Is that so? In that book, there's this idea of quality, right? Quality being the moment in time and space where something is happening and something is emerging that wasn't there before, because of the spark of truth that emerges when two people consult and discuss and maybe even clash, right? And to me, this is one of those moments, right? And it's really important. And I'm going to express again from my biased perspective how I view that. And that is that there are two books of Revelation. One is the revealed Word of God, which I believe in, which you don't have to. The other is the creation itself, and I don't care if you call it creation, but that is the book of Revelation that is our human physical existence, the planet, the universe, everything that I believe God created. That is his more powerful revelation. That is more powerful and profound in a way. I'm not now going to get into a theological debate, because there will be those on all sides of religion that will argue with me, and they're right. They're right, but I'm trying to make a point here, and that is that the reason it's more powerful and profound because it is vested with all of that which every human being, whether or not they accept that it's creation. So it is more powerful because it is authoritative by anyone who declares that they do not deny reality. And some of what's going on today, where certain people are denying biology and creating, and I'm going to just go way out on a limb here, and I'm going to say something that's going to be offensive to some people. I apologize. I don't know how else to say it. I disagree with the term gender affirming, because to me, gender affirming would be affirming that, yes, you are a man, or yes, you are a woman, right? Rather than, yes, you are not a man, or yes, you are not a woman, right? In other words, what biology tells us, and then there are those who say, well, I'm not a biologist. I'm not speaking to any one individual's biology, right? I'm not speaking to any one individual, but as a general rule, and science deals in data, and science deals in instances, and science deals in repeatable experiments, independently verifiable experiments and hypotheses. So when we start talking about biology, we should not be denying biology, right? Because reality is what reality is. And when you start getting off into delusional creations that are abstract and divorced from reality, that can clearly be proven wrong by reality, then you're not being truthful, you're not being honest, you're not leading towards goodness. Now, I am not making any specific declaration. I'm just providing a counterpoint to the term gender affirming. Why does gender affirming mean that I can tell a person, yes, I'm going to be gender affirming that you can now become a woman when biologically you are a man? Or that you can now become a man when biologically you're a woman? How is that gender affirming?
Well, look, Wade,
and I don't mean to put you on the spot on this topic. I apologize.
no, I'm very much male. I know that, and
But
yeah.
you were talking about this biological drive that goes back to, you know.
My friend, listen, I know we only have a few minutes left, and I would say as a friend, I think that you're a little bit too abrasive on this topic, a little too radicalized. And I'm saying that as a friend, and in a true sense of the word friend. And the reason, and I'll say this because in the hierarchy that you explained before, I would say my understanding, my base understanding of what Jordan was saying, pulling information from our historical past and the traditions. The biggest legacy that the Christian tradition has left us, in my opinion, just from pulling little bits and bites of information, would be love.
Agreed.
Okay. So
100%. It is the sign of the Christian covenant. By this shall all men know that you have loved one for another.
Right.
This is the sign of being a disciple.
So hopefully I don't lose this thread. Now, the difference between that and the Greek origins is that there's goodness, which is an impregnated ethical system. Okay. Now, that's not the same as love. If you look at what is the one word you could use, Christianity would use love. The Greek tradition would use goodness. Well,
there are multiple Greek words for love, by the way. So when we say love, we would have to...
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's what we're trying to focus on, a pinpoint of where that focal point is, right? And so from the Platonic standpoint, it's goodness. And I think that's all the derivatives that gave us the Christianity and the versions of Christianity that we have now. I'm diverging a little bit here. I wanted to focus on the fact
you're actually spot on. Thank you. Just keep going.
But I wanted to focus on why I thought you were being you're radicalized on that position of gender affirming. Okay. So if our starting point is love, okay, the idea that an individual, okay, or a group of individuals want to express themselves in a way that makes them feel loved and included in society seems to be like a reflection of society more than a reflection on them. When you and this is what I think I experience when talking with people who are from the LGBT community. The relationships or the interactions that I've had to date, there's one young girl who is on my YouTube channel. She's got a series that's she's a what is her designation? She's a two-feather, she's not into sexual expression or activity. She's repulsed by it. She's being truthful with what she thinks she's being truthful with. Now, that's how she feels, right? That's how. Now, she may be mistaken. If we go too hard nosed on her, then I think that is anything but that foremost first step of love first. And I think we have nothing to worry about. She can't reproduce. Did you get the simple point? There's no long-term
Right.
consequence.
So-
if
so-
if just one
well-
thing, if there's a slippery slope that somehow we think that we allow that, and a whole bunch more people will become, gender non-conforming, and we'll end up with a whole species of like, I don't know, like X, Y, and Z's, all letters of the alphabet. I mean, I'm trivializing it. I'm being only to emphasize a point.
I'm speaking as a parent of children who, I don't know, my children are 11 and 14.
Right.
I have no idea how they may decide to express themselves. We have a general belief in our family that the rules of the house apply until you're 15. When you're 15, you graduate, and there's this in the Spanish. It's called the 15th birthday for a girl is significant. In Judaism, there's the bar mitzvah. You have these coming of age designations in various cultures. In our family, we adopt the view that when you reach 15, you have a certain maturity. You have graduated at 15 to making choices that we will give you much, much more freedom to go do and express and be whatever you want to be, right? But until you're 15, you will conform to certain rules of the house. And this is where I'm coming from, whereas I know from myself as a parent and other parents that the so-called safe spaces in schools, for example, are anything but safe for certain other kinds of kids. So all I'm saying here is we're creating a language that.
But let me clarify. You're saying unsafe for students that are, or for children who might feel that they have to be pushed into a perverse understanding of the way biology is. Is that what you're saying?
Well, for me, let me be real specific here as to the specific point I was addressing. Yes, I believe that any educational system that teaches children to deny reality and creates a language that is in contradiction to reality. We're now talking 1984. We're talking doublespeak, right? So I'm merely raising the question, and I'm presenting my perspective on what the term gender affirming does and doesn't mean, or should and shouldn't mean. I'm not addressing your friend and her particular desire to express herself. I'm addressing, and by the way, I taught 4th and 5th grade in California in the mid-90s. And we had a social studies book, which was the designated required curriculum in California. And for some of our more red states, some of the more conservative areas, what was being taught in California in 1995 was already way over a line versus what might or might not be being taught in California today. I don't really know what the curriculum specifically is, but I get insight and I see things, and I've looked into a little bit about what some of the teachers union issues are and what teachers are and are not required to do. And we recently moved out of Madison, which was fighting a battle at the Supreme Court level in the state of Wisconsin Supreme Court around the definition of safe space, in which the teacher had the right to withhold information from the parents about what they were teaching the child and encouraging the child to do, even to the degree, and I may not have all the facts exactly right, I'm not sure, I don't mean to in any way be untruthful or misrepresent, but I believe even to like encouraging children to begin hormone therapy and not tell the parents. To me, this is the very definition of an unsafe space, because I do not want my 10, 11, or 12, or 13-year-old to be making the decision based on the ideology and perspectives of certain teachers to begin down the path of hormone therapy. And I have personal experience with children, young boys who came home and said, "Mommy, I want to cut off my blank," right? And these are pre-adolescents who are being influenced by the messaging within those so-called safe spaces, which are, quote, gender affirming, unquote, and susceptible children through that low resolution. Now we're getting back to Jordan Peterson, through that low resolution understanding of what is being presented to them, whether it was B.F. Skinner or whatever the modern psychology is around gender affirming spaces, is coming home and saying, you know, I want to cut that thing off because I don't want to be a boy. But the boy actually doesn't understand what that means or why he feels that way. It is something that is being generated by the environment that he is in, not by any inherent desire to be a different gender. So it gets back to this basic question of nature versus nurture, right? Which is part of the whole discussion that needs to be had, but yet the winds are blowing very strongly in one direction, and we lurch forward as a species from ditch to ditch. I'm not here to present a conservative view or a liberal view or get in. I'm talking about Jordan Peterson and his discussion that we perceive the world through these various stories and narratives, and they're based on the great works of literature. And they're based in the universities today and what the universities are putting out in terms of social science.
Yeah,
I'll stop there.
it was well put. I'd say that was a good defense. And
I sincerely apologize to anyone who is listening or may come across this podcast. I did not mean to in any way impinge on somebody's desire to express themselves or their perception of who and what they are. What I'm talking about is the society that we create and what winds we allow to blow and how strongly we allow those winds to blow as we have hopefully an open discussion on all these topics to move forward as a species.
especially the young children. I remember there was something about suicide awareness. I remember reading this in an article at one point, and the more awareness and campaigns that were intended to help that problem actually made suicide numbers increase. And you got to step back and scratch your head. And that was squarely on a liberal side.
Well, this is what you were referring to earlier, though, about science being self-correcting, right? And today's solution is tomorrow's problem. I know an old lady who swallowed a fly. I don't know why she swallowed the fly. Perhaps she'll die. You know that story. And for those in the audience, it goes on to say, I know an old lady who swallowed a spider that wriggled and tickled inside her. She swallowed the spider to catch the fly, but I don't know why she swallowed the fly. Perhaps she'll die. And it goes on and on until you get to, I know an old lady who swallowed a horse. She died, of course.
Yeah. Well, very well said. Wade, that was nice. Nicely tied up. Does that mean we have to wrap?
What are we swallowing? What are we swallowing, right? What are we consuming? What are we believing? Let's watch another minute of Jordan Peterson, if I may. I don't even remember where he's going to go with this, but I have talked way too much. And if you're okay, I'll just let him play for another minute.
Okay.
And so it isn't that the Bible is true.
Oops, I guess I first got it.
There, just end it there. Just that's good.
Oh, wait, did you guys all hear that? No, I thought nobody heard. I thought he wasn't in the stream. So it's not that the Bible is true. Let's repeat that. I'm happy with that. I'd like to hear what he says next.
Sample it by reading and listening to stories and listening to people talk. You sample that whole domain. You build a low resolution representation of that inside you. And then you listen and see through that. And so it isn't that the Bible is true. It's that the Bible is the precondition for the manifestation of truth.
Wow. So that may or may not be a good point to jump into next time. So he says it's not that the Bible is true, it's that it's the precondition for the materialization of truth or something like that. But I would submit, and I won't have the right terms here, but in principle, my mind is sort of halfway around this. Human anthropology and how our beliefs and our our societies and our institutions are shaped, right, are built on those concepts that we derive from the literature, the stories, the narratives, the frameworks that shape our internal reality and therefore shape the reality that we create externally.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And so, what's the title of this podcast, this live stream? Created in the image of God, that's my bias. The role of religion in society, a question mark on that, right? What should the role of religion be? How can we, not throw religion out, but still see growth, forward momentum, improvements in society? Does religion allow us, is it like guardrails, right? Does it allow us to not go off the cliff? Or is it keeping us from ascending the mountain? Which of those two is real, and what are your thoughts on it? And I would welcome, input from the audience, others who want to join the show and have their say. But Daniel, I hope and pray to my God that you will continue to be involved in this program, because I cannot thank you enough for stopping me and saying, friend, you're radicalized here, and I got to stop you because you're going to be abrasive and do damage to others, and you're hurting yourself by what you're saying. And then encouraging and allowing me to I don't want to be defensive, but to maybe say, look, here's what I was trying to say, and I really apologize for the way I said it, and here's what I'm actually getting at. I am not homophobic. I'm not transgender phobic. I don't have some fear of a race of transgender zombies creating an apocalypse. I just want us as a society and as a species to be able to talk to one another and to share our conflicting perspectives on these topics. And this term, this language of gender affirming, it has swept across, I don't know, parts of the planet, cities, nations. What does it mean? Is it the right term? Or as you talked about suicide, are we creating harm? Are we improving? Are we off in a ditch? Do we need to course correct? Do we need to create some other way to address these topics and these issues? It's really the same with Roe v. Wade, which we talked about. I'll go on record and personally say that, I can support Roe v. Wade. I can support a legislated protection of the right for a woman to have an abortion, and that it is her choice, and that she should be able to make that decision in consultation with a doctor, and that the state should not interfere and stop her from doing that. But I would completely disagree with abortion as a method of contraception. I would argue that there might be extremely rare cases where I would think that the woman has made the right choice, right? But I'm not that woman, and it's not up to me to determine when she did or didn't make the right choice. That's between her and God, her and the doctor, her and her conscience, her and her future, her life. She can make that bed and sleep in it because she may or may not have had any control over the situation she found herself in. For just to give one example.
That's very interesting, Wade, because your approach is not something that you hear from, I guess, religious fundamental positions, right? Like it's a very liberal position. Without,
how dare you call me a liberal?
Liberal, not political party or liberal, but a very.
If my dad is
position,
watching,
right?
you just cost me my inheritance.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Oh no, it might be viewed as a liberal position, but here's how. When I was in the ministry, I advocated constantly based on my childhood experience and the horrible pain and disaster of divorce. And by the way, here's my plug for my first book, The People of the Sign. I was kidnapped as a child in a domestic kidnapping, smuggled out of the country, separated from both parents in a court case that went to the Supreme Court of Sweden. right? So divorce shaped my life, and not in a good way. And as I like to tell people, my dad lost the case at the Supreme Court. I was given back to my mother. And after that, my life got weird. So it's an interesting story. It's called The People of the Sign. What's my point here? As a minister, I liked in my sermons to include the fact that in the Bible it says God hates divorce. God hates divorce. You don't think about, it's not popular in modern society, even in religious circles, to talk about the things that God hates. God hates the thing that you're doing or have done or are about to do. But the Pharisees, or it might have been the Sadducees, but I think it was the Pharisees, tried to trap Jesus on this point. And they came and said to him, "What do you say? Moses allowed divorce. What do you say?" And Jesus gave a very interesting answer. He said, "Moses allowed divorce because of the hardness of your hearts," which, by the way, is the title of my second book. Go buy that one, too, after you buy the first one and read it. Moses allowed divorce, just like Roe v. Wade allowed a woman to get an abortion. But in this case, divorce, he says, because of the hardness of your hearts. But from the beginning, it was not so, which I read and interpret to be, but the original intent of God was that divorce wouldn't happen, that a man and a woman would come together in love and they would work it out. But it's allowed by God because of our inability to get it right, because of the challenges we face as human beings, because of the stupid, wrong decisions we make and the circumstances we find ourselves in, sometimes not even of our control, right? Again, many times throughout human history, people have been forced into marriages that they didn't want, right? And that often in the name of religion, right? We talked about the corruption of religion and how the divine message gets misunderstood, misinterpreted, calcified into a corrupt form of what the intent was. And Jesus goes back to the original intent and says, yeah, God hates divorce. He allowed it, however, because of the hardness of your hearts. But the original intent was, work it out. That's what you should be striving for. That's what you should be aspiring for. And again, going back to the image of the woman as our soul, that for men, for the male of the species, that inspiration. I mean, how many love songs have been written, right, by men who epitomize that woman as a thing of beauty and aspiration? Of course, that can also be viewed in terms of objectifying women and demeaning women. But there's something aspirational that it used to be said, behind every good man there's a great woman, or whatever.
Yeah.
Something aspirational that drives us forward as a species to create goodness and better things. And sorry, I'm off on a long monologue again. I was a minister.
I have a question for you. So building on the idea of woman as the soul, how would you bridge the gap or clarify for the listener the role of the mother, as in a theological mother? I've been having that discussion with my son, and he draws a blank as well. Everything that's holy as a mother of God, basically. Let's freeform associate that a little bit. The mother of God, and what comes to mind when you experience the mother of God?
Well, to the degree that Jesus was the Son of God, right, then Mary is the mother of God, right? And that's what you're getting at with that term, mother of God. Oh. I don't really want to discuss that specifically, because it gets into deep theological conundrums, and it's going to get me into hot water in ways that I just don't want to. But in terms of, in a more general way, if the woman can symbolize our soul, right, then what does the mother symbolize, right? The source of life, the nurturing aspect of God, right? The comforting, pure love, right? A mother has to provide a level, a type, a degree of love that, again, a man could only ever aspire to, but never, ever fulfill. Not that a man won't sacrifice himself for his children. And I'm going to go on a little tangent here, say men are not, in defense of the male of the species, the testosterone-based beings such as I am, we don't get enough credit for our sacrifices. I don't in any way mean to demean, belittle, or put down the role of the male, because that's been done enough. In our modern Western society, the male of the species has, in my view, been under attack for many decades. That's a whole nother Oprah, a whole nother problem. So I don't want to ignore that. But that doesn't negate the fact that a man can never, ever bring to the table what the mother brings. By nurturing that new life inside her for 9 months and then carrying forward through the delivery. And, as a father, being at the birth of my 2 children, never have I experienced the degree of terror. I literally thought I was going to die twice in my life. One was in a stupid incident off of the north shore of the island of Kauai, where I was out in major swells where I had no business as a non-native being in that water. And similarly in South Africa, under apartheid, I might add, where I was down at a camp that was integrated, by the way, of young kids. Don't tell the then apartheid government that that's what I was doing there, because they almost didn't let me in the first place. But regardless of that, I was down there on a horse that somebody encouraged to gallop with me on its back. And those 2 instances, I feared for my life for several minutes, thinking this is where I die, literally, viscerally. But that doesn't compare to the terror that I felt when my wife was giving birth, especially to our first child, and what she was going through, and 44 hours of labor before it then went to emergency C-section. And not to get too graphic here, but then they began to open her up, and I'm standing there, and there was this like paper barrier between her head and what they were doing. And I was standing next to her, holding her hand, watching what they were doing on the other side of that paper barrier where she couldn't see it. And of course, she was medicated and drugged up. She couldn't feel it. And she's looking at me for hope and encouragement. And I saw what they were doing, and I saw the blood begin to drain out of her face as she was looking at me, and I was holding her hand and trying to encourage her that everything was going to be okay. And seeing the horror of her being cut open and, literally, sort of her intestines coming out as they were trying to get the baby, or at least what perceived to me, and just this horrible situation where I was seeing her literally, in my mind, die in front of me, and me having to hold her hand and encourage her it was all going to be okay. Terrifying, horrible, far worse than me thinking of dying. But even then, I was an outside observer. I wasn't the one going through that for 44 hours leading up to that point. And then her, and the Bible describes it beautifully, after the birth, the woman gives no thought. She goes back and does it again. She bore me a second child after that. Despite that horror. What man would do that? What man would do it once?
No.
And, in that sense, forget about the whole gender issue. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to describe it, but man and woman, birthing parent, whatever. But for me, how can any male describe what it means to be a mother? All we can do is sit in awe.
Well said, Wade. Well said. thank you for sharing. I think on behalf of anybody that's listening, that was very touching.
But this gets back to what you're talking about, science and the human experience and the need to let our experiences and what we learn from the physical universe from a scientific inquiry perspective, whether it's that kind of experience, which is visceral and direct, or a more studied approach to analyzing mussels or grasshoppers, mussels meaning the kind in the water, or human muscles, right? Or, whatever field or endeavor of science which we're exploring the beauty of what I call creation, to inform our understanding of what God's original intent was, despite religion. But that's not to disrespect religion, even though I tend from time to time to disrespect religion because I see the corruption in it constantly. I've been around enough to be, and I was a former minister, and I resigned from the ministry because of that corruption, despite all of our efforts and everyone that I had as friends in the ministry, seeking to understand the divine purpose and the wisdom of God and studying the holy texts, religion becomes corrupt over time. Religion becomes calcified. It becomes superstitious. It enshrines dogma. It doesn't progress the way it needs to. But it also serves a guardrail function. So that's the reason for this show. Created in the image of God, a loose divine concept. What is the role of religion in society? How does that play out? How does that work? What does it look like?
I think the show's getting its legs. It just grew its legs tonight.
Well, thank you, Daniel. And I again, you are integral to that. And I mean that, to have somebody who can understand my lunatic ravings and, comment on them and, be that guardrail on that, perspective. And so hopefully we are helping each other to formulate what it is that needs to be said, what it is that needs to be studied, what it is that needs to be considered for society at this pivotal junction in human history, with culture wars going on in this nation and swirling contention on any conceivable topic based on ideologies and isms of every kind. How can we as a human species learn to discuss and consult and move the human project forward?
Yeah. Well, the only thing I can say is I'll try and be on time next week.
Again, I'm sure that was on us, and it all worked out. And
Yeah.
that's my excuse. The reason we went overtime, it's Daniel's fault because he was late.
It was my fault. Yeah, it was. I lost track of time. I was here. Yeah, it was my fault.
Well, Daniel.
My apologies, audience. I really apologize. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, no need to apologize. We don't operate in guilt, despite being a somewhat religious broadcast. And on that note, thank you, dear friends, for tuning in. Thank you, Daniel, for being here. Thank you, Alex, who had to skedaddle because. And by the way, I should announce, Alex is, speaking of mothers, he is expecting a new child. And I think he shared on a previous broadcast that one of his daughters has some medical issues and challenges, which occupies him. So Alex is unfortunately going to have to take a hiatus after helping us launch the show. We'll be looking for a new introducer, host, and we've got several people in the background, and I'm sure there's somebody there who can fill Alex's shoes. If you'd like to be more involved in the show and you're watching, please reach out to me. wade@soupllc.com. I'm going to post that right here so that you can reach out to me directly by email. And SOUP stands for Something or Other Publishing, the publishing company that I founded, which also publishes my books, and many other authors. Hope that you will continue to tune in. Hope you will get more involved and engaged in this dialogue and discussion. We would love to have you, or at least your comments on the show, to help with this ongoing, evolving dialogue. Daniel, any last comments for our audience before we sign off for the night?
No, that's it. It was a really, I really enjoyed tonight's episode. So hopefully we can see everybody back next week.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and goodbye,
Okay.
everyone.